Hey guys, tonight we ease you into the immense, wave-battered solitude of a 19th century lightkeeper's life on the most unforgiving southwestern edge of Tasmania, a place so remote even the echo of your own voice seems to get lost in the endless churn of the Southern Ocean. Close your eyes, and you are there. You stand at the base of the tower, feeling the sheer, brute force of the wind trying to peel the skin from your bones. It doesn't just push, it screams, a sustained, high-pitched shriek that tells you unequivocally that you are not welcome. The air is so thick with cold, pulverized salt spray that it tastes like raw ocean, a sharp, bitter tang on your tongue. Look up, and the light, your entire purpose, seems to swim hundreds of feet above you, a promise of safety in a world determined to drown ships and men alike. The tower itself is a monument to human arrogance and tenacity, a spire of pale sandstone or rough, hewn granite defying the furious, gray horizon. You run a calloused hand over the cooling surface of the stone. It's already slick with the constant moisture. This isn't a cozy, quaint little cottage job. This is the last post on Earth, the end of the line, the final dot of civilization before Antarctica. You've traded the mundane chatter of the docks and the smell of city coal smoke for the deafening, eternal roar of the waves and the profound, isolating silence between your own ears. You probably won't survive this first year without cracking. Not really. The isolation has a way of finding the weakest beam in your mental structure and gently, persistently prying it apart. The moment the small, stinking schooner that dropped you off disappears behind the headland, the isolation becomes a physical weight. Like wet wool draped over your shoulders, it settles in the marrow of your bones. There's a head keeper, of course, and perhaps one or two assistants, but they are already ghosts to you, defined less by personality and more by their proximity to the lamp room and their shared burden. They nod, they grunt, they do not speak of feelings. That's a luxury for the mainland. Your immediate reality is a handful of routines, checking the stores, trimming the wicks, polishing the brass, always polishing. The days are not measured in sunrise and sunset, but in the minutes until the light must be lit and the interminable hours it must run. You remember the journey here, weeks of grinding nausea, the boat hiving like a dying whale, and the captain's somber face. He knew what you were getting into. Everyone did. A mainstream historical fact often forgotten is that lighthouse keepers, particularly in the Southern Ocean, were required to be married, not for comfort, but because authorities believed the constant company of a wife would stave off the worst forms of insanity. A rather bleak, utilitarian view of marriage, wouldn't you say? Ah, yes, darling, I love you because you prevent me from talking to the seagulls. The sheer logistical challenge of keeping the light burning is humbling. Forget flicking a switch. This is a monumental, manual operation. Inside the tower, the air is cold and smells of oil, brass cleaner, and a deep, ancient dampness. You climb the spiral stairs, hundreds of them, feeling your legs already burn. They are worn smooth by the boots of men who have done this exact climb thousands of times before you. Men who went mad or simply disappeared into the anonymity of the waves. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you are watching from and what time it is. It's nice to imagine all of us together in the quiet. As you reach the lamp room for the first time, a quirky tidbit surfaces. The early optical systems were so valuable, and their mechanisms so delicate, that keepers were sometimes known to sleep within the lantern room itself, just to guard against mechanical failure or, more likely, to escape the drafty, low-ceilinged living quarters below. Imagine tucking yourself in next to a half-ton of magnifying glass and brass clockwork. Sleep well? The most dominating feature is the Fresnel lens, a shimmering, layered cathedral of glass prisms that looks impossibly delicate yet concentrates a tiny flame into a beam visible for 20 miles. It's a 19th century masterpiece of engineering, and it is entirely up to you to keep it spinning smoothly. This is the heart of your entire world, and it requires constant, gentle vigilance. You look down at the massive, intricate clockwork mechanism that rotates the lens. It's driven by weights, a tremendous weight that descends slowly down a central shaft in the tower's core, like a slow-motion bronze pendulum. Every few hours, you will have to crank that weight back up, a back-breaking task that keeps you painfully aware of the passage of time. Historians still argue whether the extreme isolation or the sheer monotony of repetitive, heavy physical tasks contributed more to the psychological breakdowns frequently observed among keepers. Personally, I'm putting my money on the wind. You are introduced to the lamp itself, which in this era likely burns specialized whale oil or, if you're lucky, kerosene. You have to trim the wicks with absolute precision. Too high, and you get smoke, and a soot-stained lens too low, and the light is weak and useless. It's an art of gentle, steady hands. The smell of the raw oil is thick and cloying, sticking to your clothes, and eventually becoming just your smell. You're no longer just a person. You are a walking aroma of brass polish, brine, and highly flammable fuel. You learn quickly that even a single careless smudge on the glass can diminish the light's effective range by miles, and those miles could mean the difference between a safe passage and a catastrophic wreck on the jagged, invisible rocks below. The entire structure vibrates with the wind. The sound is not uniform. It moans, whistles, and occasionally, when the gusts hit just right, it sounds uncannily like a distant, mournful foghorn that isn't actually sounding. You find yourself checking the actual foghorn, just in case. It's a small, gentle paranoia, one of many that will slowly accumulate over the next year, like barnacles on the hull of your sanity. You settle into the living quarters, a small, stone-built barracks connected to the tower by a short, sheltered path. The furniture is sparse, a hard cot, a plain wooden table, a single, flickering oil lamp of your own. You unpack your few personal effects, a book, a worn photograph, perhaps a small, heavy carving knife. These items will soon be your only tangible connection to the world you left behind. Every object, every scratch in the wood, will take on an enormous significance because you have nothing else to hold on to. You realize that your new life is not about doing many things, but about doing one thing perfectly over and over, until the rhythm of the work becomes the rhythm of your heart. You are a sentinel, a protector, and a prisoner, all wrapped up in a scratchy woolen jacket, standing on the edge of the world, waiting for the night to fall. The night arrives not with a gentle fade, but with a brutal, sudden violence, swallowing the weak, watery sun whole. Outside, the world is reduced to two things: the deafening sound of the wind and the impenetrable blackness of the ocean. You begin your shift, the true work, the monotonous, critical routine of maintaining the light, now fully underway. Your first task is the wick-trimming ritual. You descend to the small workshop where the fuel is stored and meticulously prepare the lamp. In the grand scheme of things, it's a tiny, mundane action, yet it holds the fate of countless sailors in its execution. Each wick must be cut to the perfect, precise length and shape, often using a specialized pair of brass scissors or a curved cutter. To ensure a clean, bright, soot-free flame, you do this under the dim, flickering light of a separate small oil lamp, the only illumination allowed, as you can't risk spilling fuel near the enormous main light. You imagine a sailor far out at sea, trusting their life to the millimeter, perfect angle of your wick cut. No pressure, right? Once the wicks are set and the reservoirs are topped up with the viscous, heavy oil, you carry the delicate assembly, piece by piece, up the hundreds of spiraling steps. The brass of the lamp is cold and slippery against your gloved hands, and you are intensely aware of the vast drop spiraling away beside you. When you finally reach the lantern room, the temperature is shockingly lower than below, thanks to the immense glass enclosure constantly cooled by the wind. Now, the light is lit. It's a moment of profound, quiet satisfaction. A small, perfect flame bursts to life. But it's not enough. This is where the magic of the Fresnel lens, that dazzling complex array of glass, comes into play. You carefully position the flame at the lens's focal point. Immediately, the light is captured, gathered, and amplified, shooting out horizontally in a concentrated beam that cuts through the blackness like a physical entity. You step back, wiping the sweat from your brow, and watch the beam begin its slow, majestic sweep across the ocean. But your work has only just begun. This light does not burn on its own. It must be constantly fed and gently turned. The rotation of the lens, which gives the light its signature flash pattern. Your lighthouse's unique identity in the night is controlled by the clockwork mechanism. Remember that heavy weight descending the shaft. It needs tending every 2 to 3 hours, depending on the height of the tower and the length of the chain. You must descend to the base of the wending shaft and crank the weight back up. It's a brutal, repetitive chore. Imagine turning a large, stiff handle over and over, lifting hundreds of pounds of metal against the insistent pull of gravity. The rhythmic squeak of the gears and the scrape of the chain become the soundtrack to your midnight life. You count the turns, 100, 200, 300, your muscles aching, your breath coming in strained puffs in the cold, silent stairwell. This cranking is your metronome, governing the rhythm of your sleep and waking life. You can't set an alarm for this. The moment the weight hits the bottom, the lens stops turning, and the light becomes a fixed, non-identifiable beacon. A fatal error. You must simply feel the time passing in the stiffness of your joints and the anxiety in your gut. This clockwork mechanism is a mainstream historical fact critical to lighthouse technology. It's a purely mechanical marvel. No electricity, no complex circuitry, just gears, weights, and gravity, designed to work flawlessly for hours on end, requiring only the muscle and constant, attentive presence of a keeper. A clever, reliable design, but one that demanded unrelenting servitude. As the lens spins, you begin the endless, meticulous process of polishing the lens glass and the brass fittings. Even the smallest film of soot or salt spray must be removed immediately, as it dims the light. You use soft cloths and specialized cleaners, working slowly in the cramped space, sometimes awkwardly reaching around the giant prisms. It's a meditative act, actually. The repetitive motion, the smell of the brass polish. It all serves to quiet the roaring chaos outside and the growing noise inside your own head. One quirky or fringe tidbit involves the specific gravity of the mercury used in some of the most advanced lighthouse designs. To reduce the friction of the massive lens carriage, it sometimes floated in a trough of liquid mercury. Imagine a gigantic, priceless optical instrument, literally floating on a poisonous metal to spin with minimal effort. Keepers had to be extremely careful not to spill or breathe the fumes, adding another layer of silent, constant danger to the routine. You spend a good hour on the glass, your breath misting the prisms as you work. The loneliness of this vigil is absolute. Your colleagues, the other keepers, are in their bunks below. You are the sole human eye keeping watch over an abyss. You try to pass the time. You mentally list the objects you left behind. You replay conversations from years ago, examining them for hidden meanings. You might try to read, but the light is poor, and the wind is a distracting tyrant. Historians still argue whether the high turnover rate among lightkeepers was due primarily to the brutal environmental conditions, the sheer physical labor of the lamp maintenance, or the unique psychological burden of being the sole, tiny point of human responsibility in such a vast, indifferent landscape. You can feel the answer in your own wary muscles and the tightness in your chest. It's all three, working in slow, devastating combination. Remember the first impression of the wind. It hasn't stopped. It presses against the thick glass of the lantern room with palpable force. You feel the whole tower sway just slightly, a movement you try desperately to convince yourself is merely imagination, but which you know, deep down, is real. The beam cuts its cycle, and for a fleeting second, it illuminates the churning whitecaps of the ocean, a brutal, frothing wilderness that promises only destruction. You are standing between the dark and the sailors, and all you have is a clean wick, polished brass, and the strength to turn a crank. You check the oil level again, just to be sure. You check the clockwork to confirm the beat is steady. You check the brass for streaks. You are an instrument of vigilance, meticulously calibrated to the needs of the night. The clockwork keeps its faithful, monotonous rhythm, but the human machinery, that would be you, begins to register the dull ache of the constant cold and the endless repetition. Now, in the gray, wind-whipped morning, your thoughts turn from the beam of light to the grinding reality of sustenance of food, supplies, and the crushing psychological weight of isolation. Your entire existence hinges on the supply ship, an event so rare and vital it dominates your mental calendar. On this remote Tasmanian edge, a supply run might happen only every 3 to 6 months. You become a connoisseur of the far horizon, spending hours with your spyglass scanning the indifferent sea. You're not looking for a vessel, you're looking for hope. When the ship does finally arrive, a tiny smoke, puffing speck struggling against the waves, it's a major event, a frantic, highly orchestrated scramble. There are no safe harbors here, just jagged reefs and sheer cliffs. The supplies, flour, salt pork, hard biscuits, coal, kerosene, and perhaps a crate of potatoes have to be winched or ferried ashore in small, flat-bottomed boats called surf boats, through breaking waves that could smash a man against the rocks in an instant. You and the other keepers become dock workers and stevedores for a day, hauling, dragging, and stowing hundreds of pounds of cargo into the stone supply sheds. The sheer volume of kerosene or whale oil is astonishing, a mainstream historical fact reflecting the pre-electric reality. The keepers' stores were often more dedicated to fuel than to food. Imagine a shed stacked floor to ceiling with cans or barrels of lamp oil, enough to power your enormous lens for months of continuous service. This fuel is treated like liquid gold. Every drop is accounted for. Every barrel is inspected for leaks. The quantity needed simply to keep one small glass house bright is a constant reminder of the scale of the operation. After the ship leaves, the silence that falls back upon the station is even deeper than before. The sight of fresh supplies is a momentary comfort, but it quickly shifts into the fear of consuming them. Every potato, every ounce of flour, every piece of hard, salted meat is finite. You must become a master of rationing. The chief keeper issues the stores with a parsimony that borders on cruelty, but it is necessary. You learn the exact point at which a salted ham turns from a meal into a potential source of scurvy. You become intimately familiar with the taste of weevil-ridden flour. A gentle crunch you learn to ignore. You soon realize your diet will be monotonous biscuit, boiled meat, and weak tea, day in and day out. A quirky or fringe tidbit about lighthouse life involves the peculiar practice of store breaking. Because of the immense isolation and the lack of fresh food, some keepers developed eccentric coping mechanisms. They would occasionally steal small amounts of preserved fruit or tinned delicacies, often shipped in for the head keeper, and consume them in secret, a tiny, rebellious act against the overwhelming, restrictive monotony. This wasn't always driven by hunger, but by a deep, psychological need for a flash of luxury or a taste of the outside world, a momentary break from the salt pork purgatory. Who knew a tin of peaches could be so revolutionary? You find yourself doing the most profoundly human thing in isolation, inventing rituals. You carefully save the dried peels from a rare, imported orange, placing them in a small drawer, just to open it sometimes and smell the faint, citrus ghost of civilization. You count the nails in your toolbox. You memorize the pattern of lichen growth on the water cistern. These small acts of meticulous observation are how you anchor yourself to the present and keep the vast, empty future from swallowing you whole. The emotional impact of the isolation is palpable. It doesn't scream at you, it whispers, and it works slowly, like rust. The other keepers are your only human contact, yet you rarely speak beyond the necessary exchange of duties. They are simply mirrors of your own solitude. There's a constant low-grade tension. Small differences of opinion, the temperature of the shared stove, the exact time the foghorn should be tested, can escalate quickly, magnified by the pressure cooker environment. You have nowhere to go to cool off. The outside is only wind and death. Historians still argue whether the traditional lighthouse service model, which often housed multiple keepers and their families together in close quarters for months on end, was truly effective in preventing lighthouse madness, or if the sustained lack of privacy and inescapable proximity to the same few people simply replaced one form of suffering with another. It's a closed system, and you are trapped in its inertia. You remember the feeling of your last conversation with a stranger on the mainland, the easy flow of everyday gossip, the sheer noise of a bustling street. That world is now utterly fantastic to you, a dream of impossible abundance. Out here, you trudge back up the tower, your boots heavy, your mind lightened only slightly by the successful arrival of the stores. An ephemeral relief, quickly replaced by the knowledge that you must now start waiting for the next one. You check the oil lamp, give the lens a final, quick polish, and listen to the relentless, pounding heart of the tower's clockwork mechanism, which knows no hunger, no loneliness, and no end. The quiet routine you fought so hard to establish. The rhythm of the wending, the trimming, the polishing, is brutally shattered the moment the weather turns from merely awful to truly catastrophic. Tonight is not just a windy night, it's a Southern Ocean tempest, an expression of geological fury, designed to humble any human endeavor, especially one perched precariously on a jagged outcrop of rock. You are high in the lantern room when the first, truly violent squall hits. It's not a gust, it's a physical assault. The sound is less wind and more a roaring, solid wall of pressure, making the thick glass panes of the lantern enclosure vibrate like drum skins. Rain doesn't fall, it flies horizontally, stinging the glass so hard it sounds like someone is constantly throwing handfuls of gravel against your sanctuary. The temperature inside drops instantly. The entire tower begins to move, a subtle, terrifying shift that makes your stomach clench. You clutch the cold brass railing of the catwalk, watching the lens still dutifully sweeping its beam. The light pierces the nearest few yards of spray, then is immediately swallowed by a swirling, chaotic void. You feel a sudden, profound loneliness, realizing that the beam, your lifeline, is now virtually useless, a tiny candle in a cyclone. You are utterly dependent on the stability of the stone structure beneath you. Below, the sea is not composed of waves, but of liquid mountains. Immense, gray masses of water rearing up, and then crashing against the base of the cliff, with a sound that is less a crash and more a deep, foundational thud that resonates up through the tower's stone, a continuous, sickening tremor. Sometimes, a rogue wave will climb the sheer cliff face, reaching impossible heights, and you'll hear the impact of the spray on the very first windows of the tower. An unthinkable, frightening sound that reminds you just how close you are to being submerged. This is the moment when the brutal necessity of your post becomes agonizingly clear. You cannot leave. The lamp must be maintained. If the glass fogs from the sheer atmospheric moisture, you must wipe it down. Leaning precariously over the spinning lens in the cramped space, while the whole world shakes. If the clockwork mechanism should jam under the extreme stress, the friction, the cold, you would have to fix it, using your numb fingers and the small, oily tools, while fighting your own rising terror. A mainstream historical fact, often highlighted in lighthouse accounts, is the immense danger of the maintenance journey to the light. During a severe storm, keepers often had to physically crawl along the exposed walkways or chains connecting the dwellings to the tower, sometimes roping themselves together, simply to ensure the light stayed lit. You are now doing that crawl mentally, knowing that one slip, One failure of attention means certain, immediate death for you and potential doom for a passing ship. The storm often brings with it the grim possibility of a shipwreck. If a vessel has misjudged its position or simply been overwhelmed, it is now being driven relentlessly toward the rocks below. During the few, fleeting moments the light manages to cut through the rain, you might catch a horrifying glimpse, a dark shape, a splintering mast, being tossed about like a toy. This is where the gentle sarcasm of your inner voice completely fails you. You are a sentinel, but you are also a powerless witness. You can shine the light, but you cannot steer the ship. And in this era, rescue operations were virtually impossible in a full tempest. Your role shifts from prevention to documentation. It becomes your duty to log the time, the coordinates as best you can estimate, and the tragic, final details of the vessel for the Admiralty. This is one of the heaviest burdens of the lightkeeper's life, the quiet, chilling job of recording death. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the specific gravity of the mercury. Wait, remember that mercury we talked about in the last section? On nights like this, some keepers claimed they could actually hear the huge lens carriage shiver slightly on its bed of poisonous liquid metal due to the force of the wind buffeting the tower. A tiny, high-pitched whine from the floating apparatus, a sound that only confirmed the impossible stress being placed on the entire, massive structure. You try to distract yourself. You mentally trace the supply ship's route back to civilization, wondering what the men on board are thinking. You wonder if they will remember to bring the new copy of the London newspaper next time. You focus on the task at hand, the clockwork. You descend the stairs and crank the weight again. The physical exertion a welcome anchor against the dizzying chaos outside. Historians still argue whether the high incidence of keepers reporting ghostly apparitions or unexplained phenomena was due to genuine, fringe occurrences, or simply the psychological consequence of extreme sensory deprivation and the constant, overwhelming noise of the storm acting upon an exhausted mind. You certainly feel like you're sharing the tower with something, some entity born of the wind and the salt. Tonight, you check the lamp wick again, your hands shaking slightly, and pray for the dawn. The light, however diminished, must burn. The storm eventually exhausts itself, leaving behind a profound stillness broken only by the sullen, heavy wash of the sea and the methodical tick of the clockwork mechanism. Now, in the aftermath, your attention drifts toward the rare moments of connection with the outside world, the antiquated methods of communication, and the strange, persistent sea lore that binds the lonely keepers together. In this deep isolation on the edge of Tasmania, modern communication is a luxury decades away. You rely on the dated communication methods that are as slow and painstaking as your daily chores. Your only connection to the land is a crude, single-wire telegraph system. If you're lucky, or more likely, the use of flag signaling during the rare times a passing vessel is close enough to spot your station. Imagine standing on the catwalk in the fading light, meticulously spelling out a simple message. Need more oil. Head keeper ill. Using heavy, square signal flags, each position representing a letter. You wave them, following the strict rules of nautical code, knowing that the man on the deck of the distant steamer must be squinting through a spyglass just to read your plea. The exchange is agonizingly slow, prone to error, and utterly dependent on the weather. A simple question and answer could take half an hour of focused effort. It's a mainstream historical fact that until the widespread adoption of the telephone or reliable wireless radio, these visual methods were the only way a remote light station could report an emergency or request supplies. You are, quite literally, signaling across decades of technological change. When there's no ship, there's only the letter bag. That precious, heavy canvas pouch that arrives every few months with the supply boat is a lifeline. You and the other keepers rip it open, your hands clumsy with eagerness, searching for letters from wives, news of family, perhaps a new newspaper, already weeks old, that holds the entire, noisy history of the world you've left behind. The paper smells of the sea journey, a damp, metallic aroma. Reading the news is like holding a seashell to your ear, hearing a faint, distant echo of a party you weren't invited to. And yet, despite the distance, you are bound to every keeper who has ever served here, not just by the shared labor, but by the strange, persistent sea myths and lore passed down. These are the stories that fill the long, black watches when the wind drops and the silence presses in. The lore isn't about grand naval battles, it's about the small, peculiar superstitions of the light. There are stories of the shroud, a persistent, spectral fog that supposedly only forms near the light of a station where a keeper has died alone. They say if you hear a specific, off-key whistling sound during the fog, it's not the wind but the lonely keeper, still trying to clean the lens. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the practice of keeping specific, small pets. Keepers were often fiercely attached to cats, not just for mouse control, but because of the myth that if a cat suddenly refuses to enter the lantern room, it foretells a major mechanical failure or a devastating shipwreck within 24 hours. The quiet presence of a sleeping feline on the table is sometimes the only warmth and life you'll see for months. You find yourself watching the station cat with disproportionate anxiety. You hear stories of phantom lights, unexplained, momentary flashes that appear far out at sea, mimicking your beam but appearing at impossible times or angles. Are they optical illusions, strange weather phenomena, or something more ancient, something the sea refuses to give up? The keepers debate this endlessly in low voices over mugs of strong, lukewarm tea. Historians still argue whether these intense oral traditions and superstitious beliefs developed primarily as a psychological mechanism to cope with the isolation, a way of populating the silent, empty landscape with shared stories, or if the unique sensory environment of a lighthouse truly does produce strange, explainable phenomena that naturally lend themselves to myth-making. You stand by the light, tracing the route of your beam across the glass, feeling the connection to every ship, every sailor, and every keeper who has ever watched the light. You are a silent participant in a continuous, multi-generational conversation conducted only in light, brass, and the low, comforting tick of the clockwork mechanism. A sound that is, ironically, the most reliable form of communication you have. With the storm gone, and the immediate fear of shipwreck receding, your life contracts once more to the tight, shared space of the station. This is where the lightkeeper's family life, the challenging dynamics of living with a few others in the shadow of the lamp, comes into sharp, often grating focus. You are never truly alone, and yet you are profoundly isolated together. The handful of people sharing this rock, the head keeper, the assistants, and perhaps a spouse or children, are your entire society. They are all you have, and they are inescapable. Imagine living in a small, damp stone box with the same 3 or 4 people for 6 months straight, knowing that the only thing separating you from the howling emptiness of the ocean is a few feet of granite and your shared, monotonous duty. The little quirks you might have tolerated in a city neighbor become vast, unbearable offenses out here. The chief keeper's constant cough, the assistant's habit of whistling off key, the endless clatter of a child's wooden toy on the stone floor. These are the things that drill into your sanity. The strict hierarchy of the Lighthouse service is your replacement for civil society. The head keeper is a king on his little stone island, and his word is law, not because he is necessarily wise, but because order must be maintained against the backdrop of total chaos. You perform your duties based on the rota he posts, a paper document pinned to the wall that governs your sleep, your meals, and your very movements. You polish the brass, you wind the weight, you clean the living quarters, all according to his schedule. There's no room for slackness. The efficiency of the light is too vital to allow for personal moods or preferences. For those keepers who brought their families, the environment was arguably even harder. The children had no other playmates than the few others on the station, and the wives often carried the immense, thankless burden of transforming a functional, drafty barracks into something that felt remotely like a home, all while managing the dwindling food supply, remembering the scarcity we talked about in Section 3. The only town they knew was the small, circular lantern room 100 feet above their heads. A mainstream historical fact often missed is that lightkeepers' children received very little formal education, if any. Mothers were usually responsible for instruction, using the few books brought on the supply ships. Their knowledge of the world was often limited to the weather reports and the few precious, outdated maps hanging on the station wall. Their classroom was the sound of the foghorn, and their playground was a slippery, wind-lashed rock. Imagine telling your teacher you missed school because a rogue wave carried away your textbook. The most profound social dynamic is the lack of fresh conversational material. After the first few weeks, everything has been said. The weather is the weather. The light is the light. The food is the same. The silence, therefore, becomes a form of communication, a tense, careful avoidance of topics that could lead to friction, or, even worse, the profound emptiness of realizing you have nothing left to say to the person you are forced to share a stove with. You become experts in non-verbal cues, reading the set of the chief keeper's jaw, or the wary slump of the assistant's shoulders. A quirky or fringe tidbit concerns the station library. To combat the boredom and mental decay, many lighthouse associations provided small, rotating collections of books. However, they were often highly censored, usually heavy on moralizing tales, religious tracts, and practical mechanics. Anything to keep the mind busy but away from dangerous or exciting thoughts that might exacerbate restlessness. Finding a single, uncensored novel in the stack, a dusty copy of Moby Dick, was a moment of secret triumph for a literate keeper, a quiet, temporary escape from the stone confines. You retreat into your duties, finding a soothing focus in the relentless polishing. The brass and copper fittings of the lantern room become your confidence. You apply the polish, work it in with slow, circular movements, and wipe it away, revealing the warm, inner glow of the metal. It's a small, manageable task in a world where everything else is vast and uncontrollable. Historians still argue whether the high rates of chronic physical complaints among keepers, the persistent stomach issues, the headaches, the joint pain, were genuine physical ailments caused by the damp, the cold, and the poor diet, or were largely psychosomatic manifestations of the deep, sustained psychological stress imposed by the extreme isolation and inescapable proximity to the same few people. It's hard to tell when a headache is a headache, or when it's the sheer, suffocating weight of 3 more months on the rock. You finish your watch and descend, hearing the familiar, low-frequency hum of the tower's machinery fading beneath the heavy stone ceiling. You greet the next man on duty with a clipped, efficient nod. No need for words. The lamp is lit, the weight is wound, the glass is clean. The cycle of isolation continues, shared, silent, and entirely unavoidable. The cycle of silent suffering and meticulous labor is finally broken by a disruption so profound it feels almost supernatural. The sight of the relief ship cresting the horizon. It's the final, long-awaited supply boat, but this time it brings not just provisions, but your release. It is a moment of quiet, overwhelming grace. You spot it first during your early morning watch, a smudge of dark smoke on the clean line where the sea meets the sky. You watch it grow, a tiny, determined vessel fighting the endless pull of the waves. This time, the excitement isn't about more salt pork, it's about the long, silent journey home, the return to a world that you now barely remember. You quickly alert the chief keeper, and the station is instantly galvanized by a subdued energy that has been dormant for months. As the ship drops anchor and the tedious, dangerous process of transferring cargo begins, you watch the arrival of the new keepers. Your replacements. They look fresh, slightly green, full of a nervous energy and a terrible, misplaced optimism that you yourself once possessed. They carry new books, perhaps a slightly better brand of tobacco, and certainly a profound ignorance of the true nature of the silence they are about to inherit. You exchange clipped pleasantries, your words few and functional. There is no need for advice, as no advice could truly prepare them. You simply hand over the heavy, leather-bound logbook, a mainstream historical fact and the most important document in the entire station, detailing every hour of light, every drop of oil, every storm, and every regrettable shipwreck. This quiet exchange of the logbook is the symbolic passing of the torch. As you sign your final entry, you take a moment of quiet reflection. You reflect on the sheer, stubborn tenacity it took to keep that flame burning, night after night, through the howling tempests and the absolute, psychological desolation. You realize that you have succeeded not through grand heroism, but through the monotonous, gentle insistence of the clockwork mechanism and the dull ache of duty. You have been a successful keeper, not because you were brave, but because you were boringly reliable, a quirky or fringe tidbit that often emerges at moments of relief is the intense, almost overwhelming sensory shock of returning to land. Keepers often reported that the sound of human conversation was unbearably loud. The colors of the city were too vivid, and, most strangely, the absolute stillness of a town without the constant, grinding roar of the ocean was deeply unsettling. often causing a temporary form of vertigo. You prepare yourself for a world that might feel too much like a dream. You gather your few personal effects, the worn photograph, the knife, the few pages of reading you manage to get through. You descend the stairs for the final time, your hand brushing over the worn railing, saying a silent goodbye to the immense, patient stone. You look back at the tower one last time. It is already alien, no longer yours. It belongs to the next keeper, the next logbook, the next long, silent watch. Historians still argue whether lightkeepers who successfully completed their remote tours of duty returned to the mainland fundamentally changed, more withdrawn, more prone to periods of intense solitude, or if the personality type that sought out the lighthouse job in the first place was simply returning to its original, deeply introverted state. You don't know the answer, only that the noise of the ship's engine is already too loud in your ears. You climb aboard the small surfboat, feeling the spray of the waves that you have been watching from afar for a year. The little boat pitches violently as it is winched up to the deck of the steamer. You are no longer responsible for the light. Someone else is trimming the wick now. You find a small, quiet corner on the deck, and as the steamer pulls away from the cliff and the lighthouse recedes into the mist, you look back at that slender, tall tower, a thin finger of stone pointing up from the tumultuous sea. It is your past now. The journey home is long, silent, and reflective. You will spend weeks recalibrating to the sounds of civilization, the presence of too many people, the sheer variety of life. The rhythmic tick of the clockwork mechanism will remain in your memory, a persistent, calming ghost. The loneliness you fought so hard will soon feel like an odd, distant comfort, a place where the rules were simple and the purpose was clear. You are safe now, sailing away from the edge. The sea sounds have softened now, haven't they? The heavy wash of the waves has faded to a gentle lull. You are no longer bracing yourself against the wind. Let your breathing match the slow, steady rhythm of the ship's gentle movement across the calm water, away from the rocks, away from the duty. The light you kept burning is miles behind you now, a tiny, pale star in the distance, no longer demanding your vigilance. You can let the tension drain from your muscles, from your jaw, and from the tight knot in your mind. All the wicks are trimmed. All the brass is polished. The weight has been wound for the last time. Your watch is over. There is nothing more to check, nothing more to fear. The rhythmic turning of the Fresnel lens is just a slow, peaceful memory now, spinning you gently, gently into the deepest, softest sleep. Let the sounds of the journey become your comfort. The soft creak of the deck, the low, distant hum of the engine, taking you home, taking you to rest.